One of humanity's greatest dreams is to fly. For thousands of years, humanity has longed to take to the skies, and with the Wright brothers' first flight in Bindokuzia's UC, their dreams came true. Since then, aviation has developed rapidly. The sky has become a network that extends to every corner of the world. However, this great success story also has a dark side. In this documentary series, we will examine the worst plane crashes in history. We will go behind the scenes, discover how the crashes happened, which mistakes led to irreparable consequences, and how these tragedies shaped aviation. The date was March 27, 1977. On a warm spring morning in the Canary Islands, a bomb left at an airport by a pro-independence organization would trigger the deadliest aviation accident in history. Chaos broke out when members of the organization detonated a bomb placed inside a flower pot at Las Palmas Airport in the Canary Islands. 8 people were injured. After a second bomb threat was made, the police closed the terminal to air traffic. All flights were diverted to Los Rodeos Airport in Tenerife, 120 kilometers away. Los Rodeos Airport was a regional airport with a single runway and a parallel taxiway. It did not have the capacity to handle such heavy air traffic, and it did not have enough parking space. The air traffic controllers on duty in the control tower did not expect such a density either. They had to park the arriving aircraft on the taxiways because there was no space on the apron. Meanwhile, the initially beautiful weather had begun to deteriorate. Due to the drifting heavy clouds, fog had formed and visibility had dropped below 100 meters. As a result of the bomb threat, the passengers on the KLM plane were taken to the terminal. In the meantime, KLM Captain Van Zanten decided to refuel at Gran Canaria Airport instead of the usual fuel. The 35-minute full refueling would be one of the cheese holes of the disaster. After the bomb threat at Gran Canaria Airport was over, the passengers on the KLM plane were taken back to the plane from the terminal. One of the passengers, Rabina Van Lanschot, a tour guide living in Tenerife, had not reboarded the plane because she wanted to stay with her boyfriend. Lanschot would be the only passenger on the KLM plane to survive the disaster. Meanwhile, the Pan Am plane was ready for takeoff, but the KLM plane ahead of it was still refueling and could not get on the runway. This situation caused the Pan Am cockpit crew to complain, but there was nothing they could do. They had to wait for the KLM plane to finish refueling. When the refueling was finished, the KLM plane entered the runway for takeoff. The control tower had asked the plane to go to the end of the runway, turn 180 degrees, and report that they were ready to receive ATC route clearance instructions. The tower then instructed the Pan Am plane to follow the KLM plane onto the runway and use taxiway exit 3 to re-enter the parallel taxiway. In the meantime, the tower's visibility had also completely disappeared due to the fog. They were acting solely by relying on their radio conversations with the pilots. At Anya de Seferdort, the KLM plane went to the end of the runway as the tower had said, turned 180 degrees, and took the takeoff position. The Pan Am plane was looking for the third exit due to low visibility and insufficient taxiway signs, and they had not yet seen it. KLM's experienced Captain Van Zanten was tired of waiting at this airport and wanted to take off as soon as possible. If they waited any longer, they would enter the maximum flight time period determined by the Dutch authorities. Therefore, as soon as he got into takeoff position, he gave the plane full throttle and started the takeoff run. At that time, the Pan Am plane was 1,400 meters away from the KLM plane and still inside the runway. However, they could not see each other because of the fog. According to the recordings obtained from the cockpit voice recorders, CVR, when the KLM co-pilot saw that the captain had applied full power to the engines, he warned the captain by saying, "Wait a minute, we did not receive ATC route clearance." Van Zanten then eased off the throttle and said, "Yes, I know we did not. Go ahead and take it." The first officer then requested an ATC route clearance from the control tower. The air traffic controller had read the ATC route clearance using the wrong call sign, but the KLM cockpit crew did not mind and repeated the clearance and used the phrase, "We are now at takeoff," or taking off, to indicate that they were taking off. At this point, Van Zanten told the cockpit crew, "We are taking off," and released the brakes. The control tower first approved this non-standard speech patterns and non-standard procedure by saying, "Okay." However, he immediately realized his mistake and said, "Wait for takeoff clearance. I'll call you," in order to prevent KLM from starting its takeoff run. Realizing the situation, the Pan Am cockpit crew immediately intervened and said, "We are still taxiing on the runway." However, The fact that these statements were almost simultaneous created interference on the frequency, and this statement could not be received by the KLM cockpit. The Pan Am cockpit crew were talking to the KLM aircraft captain among themselves at the time. The flight engineer told his captain, "As if the bastard hadn't kept us waiting for an hour and a half, now he's rushing." According to the black box recording, 29 seconds after the KLM began its takeoff run, the Pan Am captain noticed the KLM's lights about 700 meters ahead through the fog and shouted, "There. God damn it, the son of a bitch is coming at us." At this point, the Pan Am was approaching exit 4. At this point, the Pan Am co-pilot started shouting, Get out quick." The Pan Am crew put full power on the engines and made a sharp turn to the left, off the runway, to avoid a collision. When the KLM pilots spotted the Pan Am, it was too late to stop. In a last-ditch effort, Van Zanten tried to lift the plane early to overtake the Pan Am. However, the KLM was under full fuel and had not accelerated enough to raise its nose high into the air. As a result, the tail of the aircraft, which was trying to climb, hit the runway and began to drift violently for 22 meters. When the KLM finally lifted off the ground, it was about 100 meters ahead of the Pan Am. The nose of the aircraft cleared the Pan Am, but the engines, center fuselage, and main landing gear collided with the right side of the Pan Am at 260 kilometers, 100 miles per hour, tearing open the Pan Am jet's passenger cabin just above the wings. The KLM's right engines, on the other hand, penetrated just behind the Pan Am cockpit. Immediately after the collision, the KLM took off completely. However, as a result of the collision with the Pan Am, the right outer engine was completely destroyed, and all its parts began to be swallowed by the right inner engine, and the wings were badly damaged. After 150 meters past the point of impact, the KLM dived, banked suddenly, and hit the runway, drifting for more than 300 meters. The fuel in the fully loaded tank, which also caused the plane to take off late, turned the plane into a fireball, and a fire that could not be controlled for hours immediately after the impact broke out. All passengers and flight attendants on the KLM jet lost their lives. There was a complete fight for survival on the Pan Am plane. The upper cabin section was completely destroyed, and the passengers inside lost their lives instantly. The 54 passengers and 7 crew members, most of whom were sitting in the nose section, were lucky to escape. The survivors were able to escape by climbing from the cabin, which was shaved off by KLM, to the left wing, which was still in place. Even minutes after the terrible accident, Pan Am's engines were still running. They wanted to shut down the engines, but the control cables and buttons in the cabin destroyed by KLM left the pilots helpless. None of the aircraft systems were working. The survivors were waiting to be rescued, but the firefighters were attending to the KLM in thick fog and did not know that a second plane was involved in the accident. The shock in the eyes of the passengers as they walked through the tunnel at the front of the Pan Am was evident. Pan Am flight attendant Dorothy Kelly was among the survivors. She and 60 other lucky people managed to escape the disaster with minor injuries. Cockpit voice recordings revealed the chain of human error that led to the tragedy. Black box recordings showed that KLM's pilot Van Zanten accelerated down the runway without being sure he had permission to take off. The accident once again demonstrated the vital role that air traffic controllers play. KLM, which had denied the allegations against Van Zanten and his crew from the very beginning, would have to pay close to $110 million. This accident revolutionized aviation safety. From now on, clear commands such as "cleared for takeoff" were used instead of everyday expressions such as "OK." In-cockpit communication standards were renewed. The use of automatic runway lighting systems in low visibility was made mandatory, and all cabin crew on board were required to receive rescue training. Today, Los Rodeos Airport is called Tenerife North Airport. That runway is still there, but not a single plane can take off or land on it at the same time anymore. Because aviation history has never forgotten a lesson written with the blood of 583 innocents. Safety is never rushed. If you want to watch more true stories like this and the causes of tragic plane crashes, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Stay with love, stay with justice. Goodbye.